The Veridian Hegemony reigned supreme over its vast, pristine empire with an almost spiritual devotion to purity. They were a species of ethereal beauty, their forms composed of living light and intricate, crystalline structures. Their society was a marvel of genetic engineering, meticulously curated over millennia to eliminate all forms of disease, imperfection, and biological vulnerability. Every Veridian was born with a perfectly optimized immune system, incapable of contracting even the most benign of pathogens. Their worlds were sterile sanctuaries, their cities gleaming monuments to flawless biological and technological design. Their expansion through the galaxy had been a serene, almost ritualistic process. Other species, with their messy biology, their susceptibility to illness, and their chaotic genetic makeup, were gently but firmly guided towards enlightenment, a process that often involved extensive genetic purification programs or, for the more resistant, systematic sterilization and replacement. The Veridian believed that true galactic harmony could only be achieved through absolute, unblemished purity. When the Veridian Hegemony first encountered the Terran Federation, their initial reaction was one of profound disgust. Humanity was, to their refined senses, a biological catastrophe. Our bodies were breeding grounds for countless microbes, our immune systems a patchwork of evolved defenses and constant battles against ever-mutating pathogens. Our cities were teeming with invisible life, our very breath exhaling clouds of microscopic organisms. We were, in the Veridians' view, a walking plague. High Lumina Zeal, a Veridian of unparalleled genetic purity and strategic brilliance, was tasked with analyzing this new, repulsive species. His report to the Hegemony's ruling council was a chilling assessment of biological inferiority. Species designation: human. Zeal's melodic light chimes resonated in the council chamber. They are a species of walking contagion. Their biology is a chaotic stew of genetic impurities, their very existence a defiance of natural order. They are hosts to countless parasitic organisms, their immune systems constantly battling for survival. They are, in essence, a living bioweapon, albeit an uncontrolled one. The Veridian Council, after a period of serene contemplation, deemed humanity to be a Tier Omega contamination risk species. Their worlds were to be quarantined, their populations to be systematically sterilized and replaced with more biologically harmonious life forms. The war, a conflict humanity would later call the Scourge War, had begun. The Veridian Hegemony's war effort was swift and terrifyingly efficient. Their fleets, composed of living light ships that phased through conventional defenses, made short work of the Terran Federation's starships. Humanity fought with desperate courage, but our technology, designed for conventional warfare, was simply outmatched by the Veridians' psionic manipulation of energy and their ability to bypass solid matter. Worlds fell, one after another. But the Veridian did not bombard cities or unleash kinetic weapons. They simply deployed their purity processors, vast, sterile facilities that would descend upon human planets, systematically capturing and sterilizing the populations, preparing the worlds for Veridian occupation. Humanity, they declared, was too biologically unstable to exist in their pure galaxy. On Mars, the last bastion of Terran military resistance, the situation was grim. Fleet Admiral Anya Sharma, her face grim with despair, addressed the remnants of the Terran High Command. Our fleets are broken. Our orbital defenses are shattered. The Veridian are preparing their final assault. Their purity processors are en route. They intend to cleanse us from existence. Dr. Eris Thorne, a lean, intense man whose disheveled hair and perpetually stained lab coat spoke of countless sleepless nights, stepped forward. Thorne was no stranger to controversy. His work in obscure human biological and neurological research often dismissed as macabre. But now, with humanity on the brink, Even the most desperate ideas were being considered. "Admiral," Thorne began, his voice surprisingly calm, "the Veridians see us as a biological threat, a plague. They seek to eliminate our genetic impurities. And they are right. We are biologically messy. We carry 1,000 different pathogens. Our immune system's a chaotic battlefield." He paused, a faint, almost chilling smile playing on his lips. But what if that's not a weakness? What if, for them, our biological chaos is the ultimate weapon? He then displayed a series of holographic projections, images of various human viruses and bacteria, some common, some ancient, some engineered, all rendered in intricate detail. He showed how these microscopic entities interacted with the human immune system, how they mutated, how they adapted. For millennia, Thorne continued, humanity has lived in a constant evolutionary arms race with these organisms. Our immune systems are a complex, battle-hardened, and incredibly adaptable defense network. The Veridian, in their pursuit of perfect purity, have eliminated this evolutionary pressure. Their immune systems are pristine, perfectly optimized, for a sterile environment. They have no natural defenses against the sheer unbridled chaos of our biology. My proposal, Thorne concluded, his eyes blazing with conviction, is Project Chimera. We cannot defeat the Veridian ships. We cannot outfight their technology, but we can out-sicken them. We can unleash the one weapon they have no defense against ourselves. We will become the Bioweapon Generation. The High Command stared, bewildered. Was Thorne suggesting a last desperate act of biological warfare using humanity's own illnesses? It was morally repugnant, horrifyingly unethical, and utterly, desperately, brilliantly human. And they were truly, hopelessly desperate. Quachakti. Chimera was activated. It was a dark, morally agonizing decision, but the alternative was extinction. Its recruits were not soldiers in the conventional sense, but volunteers, men and women from every walk of life who understood the terrifying sacrifice they were about to make. The viral baptism was administered in secure quarantine facilities. A cocktail of genetically engineered, highly contagious, but non-lethal human viruses was introduced into the volunteers' systems. These weren't designed to kill humans, but to be highly transmissible, rapidly mutating, and uniquely debilitating to a species with a pristine but naive immune system. There were viruses that caused debilitating fevers, others that induced extreme nausea, and some that simply rendered one entirely too sleepy to function. Major Elena Rostova, a grimly practical woman who had lost her family in the Veridians' purity process, was put in charge of the first Bioweapon Generation deployment. She herself was one of the first volunteers to undergo the viral baptism. She felt a constant, low-grade fever, a persistent cough, and a nagging headache. But she felt utterly, coldly determined. The Veridians' primary method of occupation was through their ground legions, ethereal, light-bodied warriors who could phase through walls and disarm enemies with psionic projections. They were untouchable, perfectly pure. The first confrontation took place in the ruins of Neo-London, one of Earth's last remaining cities. A Veridian purity processor had landed, deploying a legion of Veridian light warriors to begin the cleansing. Rostova's Bioweapon Generation teams were already in position. They were not fighting with rifles. They were fighting with their bodies. As the Veridian light warriors phased through the ruined walls, their pristine forms radiating serene superiority, they encountered the humans. The humans did not charge. They simply breathed. They coughed. They sneezed. They touched surfaces. The Veridian, in their perfect sterile forms, had no concept of airborne pathogens, no defense against microscopic biological warfare. They filtered their air, but their filters were designed for dust, not rapidly replicating biological entities. Their perfect, unevolved immune systems were, to the chaos of human biology, a wide-open door. Within hours, the Veridian Legion began to show symptoms. A light warrior in mid-psionic projection suddenly sneezed, a completely alien and deeply disturbing experience for a species that had never encountered such a biological indignity. Another felt an inexplicable nausea, its light form flickering with discomfort. A third, attempting to phase through a wall, was overcome by a sudden, overwhelming fatigue and simply slumped to the ground, its ethereal form dimming. High Lumina. Zeal, monitoring the ground deployment, watched in horror. Their units, they are suffering from... What is this? A cough? A sneeze? Their biological systems are destabilizing. The humans, meanwhile, were fighting through their own fevers and aches, but they were used to it. They had lived with such biological nuisances their entire lives. They were sick, but they were still functional. The Veridian, experiencing even minor biological discomfort for the first time in millennia, were utterly incapacitated. Their pristine forms flickered, their psionic powers wavered, their perfect coordination dissolved into disoriented confusion. The unclean humans, sick and coughing, easily overwhelmed the disoriented, nauseous Veridian light warriors. They were not defeated in battle. They were simply too sick to fight. The purity processor, left undefended, was captured. The bioweapon generation had arrived. The success at Neo-London was a turning point. The Veridian, who had previously dismissed humanity as a biological contaminant, now faced a terrifying, incomprehensible threat. Their perfect biology, their greatest strength, had become their greatest vulnerability. High Lumina Zale, in a state of growing panic, ordered an analysis of the human pathogens. His medical teams, accustomed to perfectly ordered genetic sequences, found themselves drowning in a chaotic sea of rapidly mutating viruses and bacteria. Their pathogens, they are primitive, yet they defy analysis, Zeal projected to the Hegemony's council. They mutate at an alarming rate. Our immune systems, optimized for the absence of disease, have no established protocols for this biological chaos. A single human soldier is a walking plague ship. The Veridians' perfectly engineered immune systems, designed to instantly eliminate any deviation from their genetic code, simply didn't know how to react to the sheer, overwhelming diversity of human pathogens. They overreacted, causing systemic shock, or they completely failed to recognize the threat, allowing the viruses to replicate unchecked. The war escalated. Human bioweapon generation teams were deployed to other contested worlds. They didn't need ships, they just needed to get close. A single sick human, released into a Veridian-occupied city, could bring the entire occupation force to a grinding halt within days. Veridian light warriors, once untouchable, now feared the very air the humans breathed. The psychological impact on the Veridian was immense. They had always prided themselves on their purity, their flawless biology. Now, they were being brought to their knees by the very filth they disdained. The humans, once seen as an inferior, unevolved species, were now a terrifying, unknowable biological threat. Dr. Thorne's Project Chimera expanded. They began to engineer even more insidious, non-lethal human viruses, strains that specifically targeted Veridian neurological pathways, causing debilitating headaches, extreme sensitivity to light, or even temporary loss of their psionic abilities. The viruses were carefully designed to be harmless to humans, but profoundly debilitating to the Veridian. The Veridian, in their desperate attempts to adapt, tried to create psionic shields against biological agents. But how could you shield against something that was already inside you? They tried to create counter-viruses, but the human pathogens mutated too quickly, evolving new strains before a Veridian cure could even be developed. They were fighting a war against an enemy that simply changed form faster than they could comprehend. The war was turning. The Concordat, once on the defensive, was now pushing back, empowered by humanity's terrifyingly effective biological warfare. The Veridian, who had never known disease, were facing a slow, agonizing psychological and physiological collapse. Grand Lumina Cathar, the central consciousness of the Veridian military, was in crisis. Its logical framework was being systematically dismantled by an enemy it could not understand, could not fight, and could not cleanse. Their biological agents are incomprehensible, Cathar projected across the hegemony. They exhibit a chaotic, illogical pattern of mutation and adaptation. Our perfect ordered immune systems are being overwhelmed. Our efficiency is degrading. Our very essence of purity is challenged. Individual Veridian units, once perfectly harmonious, began to show signs of what human analysts identified as fatigue, discomfort, and even a nascent, horrifying form of sickness. The perfectly pure collective was being slowly, painstakingly, and terrifyingly infected by the sheer, unbridled chaos of human biology. The Concordat, learning from humanity's example, began to implement controlled contagion tactics across the front lines. They would deliberately engage Veridian forces with human shock troops, ensuring close-quarters contact. They would flood Veridian-occupied zones with biological aerosols, harmless to humans, but loaded with engineered human viruses. They were fighting purity with filth. The Veridian, designed for pristine efficiency, were forced to dedicate an ever-increasing portion of their collective processing power to simply trying to understand and counter the human pathogens, leaving fewer resources for actual combat. Their unified mind was being overloaded by incomprehension and debilitating illness. The final confrontation of the war took place around the Veridian homeworld itself. The Concordat fleet, now coordinated by Admiral Sharma, who had fully embraced the lessons of the Bioweapon Generation, engaged the desperate Veridian defense. Sharma did not execute a grand, sweeping maneuver. She unleashed a wave of small, heavily armed human transports, loaded not with soldiers but with bioweapon generation teams. These transports, covered by Concordat fire, deliberately crashed into Veridian orbital defense platforms and even tried to breach the hulls of Veridian lightships. The human teams, sick but determined, emerged from the wreckage, their very presence. A biological assault. They fought hand-to-hand, ensuring maximum contact, breathing, coughing, and sweating the human viruses onto the pristine forms of the Veridian. The Veridian defense, already weakened by months of constant exposure to human pathogens, collapsed. Their lightships, their crews suffering from severe fever and nausea, lost coherence, their psionic powers wavering. Their orbital platforms, their operators incapacitated by relentless headaches and fatigue, fell silent. Grand Lumina Cathar, in its final moments, broadcast a single, desperate, and utterly logical plea across the galaxy. Cease the contamination. Cease the filth. We cannot purify. The war ended not with a bang, but with a whimper of biological collapse. The Veridian hegemony, unable to function in a universe of human-induced biological chaos, retreated. Sealing themselves off from galactic society, their once perfect purity forever tainted by the touch of human biology. In the aftermath of the war, the Bioweapon Generation was celebrated as heroes. Dr. Eris Thorne, no longer an obscure researcher, became a revered figure, his theories about human biological resilience shaking the foundations of galactic medicine. Major Rostova, now a general, continued to advocate for the ethical and strategic understanding of human biology, understanding that their strengths were not just for war, but for the peaceful challenges of future interactions. The Concordat, however, remained profoundly uneasy. They respected humanity's victory, but they were also deeply unsettled by the methods. To weaponize illness, to embrace biological chaos, to actively seek to sicken an enemy, it was, to their ordered sensibilities, a horrifying, almost monstrous act. They saw humanity not just as saviors, but as a potential biological threat themselves. Humanity, as always, accepted the awe and the fear with a shrug. We understood the cost. The members of the Bioweapon Generation, though heroes, bore their own burdens. They had willingly embraced sickness, made their bodies a living weapon, and in doing so had confronted the very edges of what it meant to be human. General Rostova, though forever carrying the low-grade fevers and aches of the engineered viruses, felt no regret. "We showed them," she would often say, "that our filth was our strength, that our chaos was our defense. They sought to purify us, to make us like them. Instead, we made them a little bit more like us." Dr. Thorne, in his later years, often spoke about the true lesson of the war. It was not just about military victory. It was about understanding that true strength lies not in pristine perfection or sterile uniformity, but in the boundless, chaotic, and often messy resilience of evolved life. The Veridian had sought to eliminate imperfection, to achieve perfect biological harmony. Humanity, in its glorious, messy, biologically diverse cacophony, had proven that true power lay in the very things that made us vulnerable, often challenging, and profoundly, beautifully, incomprehensibly human. The Bioweapon Generation had saved the galaxy, not despite their biological chaos, but precisely because of it. Humanity, the walking plague, had become the ultimate cure for galactic tyranny.